Hi there, I'm Toby Roan. Let's saddle up for Under Western Stars. It's a Republic picture, directed by Joe Kane and released in the spring of 1938. It wasn't just Roy Rogers' first starring role, but it was the first time he was actually billed as Roy Rogers. He was given the name during production. It's also the first time he rode Trigger, the smartest horse in the movies. The working title was Washington Cowboy. It was originally set up as a Gene Autry movie. Autry and Republic were all wrapped up in a squabble over Autry's contract, which led to Roy Rogers being brought in. The screenplay is credited to Dorrell McGowan, Stuart E. McGowan, and Betty Burbridge, from a story by the McGowans. It co-stars Smiley Burnette, Carol Hughes, and the Maple City Four. It was photographed by the great Jack Marta. Under Western Stars and Roy Rogers were a hit right away. Rogers would go on to make more than 80 films for Republic. In 2009, Under Western Stars was selected for the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. You know, you can convey a lot of information quickly and inexpensively with a prop newspaper like this. You see a lot of those in B movies. This is the Tinnemaha Reservoir on the Owens River about 30 miles north of Lone Pine, where much of the rest of the film was shot. The Tinnemaha Reservoir is part of the Los Angeles Aqueduct system. And there's Roy Rogers. And that's Smiley Burnette as Frog Millhouse and his horse Ring Eye. And there's Trigger. This was Trigger's second film. Olivia de Havilland wrote him in Adventures of Robin Hood. They say Smiley Burnette came up with the name Trigger after someone commented that the Palomino was quick on the trigger. That is Kenneth Harland as the big wig from the Power Company. He was a leading man in silent films, but shifted over to supporting roles and character parts when sound came in. And that's Jack Rockwell as the sheriff. Rockwell played a lot of sheriffs. Some say he played more lawmen than any other actor. He appeared in well over 200 movies. Harlan was from Boston, was acting on stage at just 7, made his first film in 1916, did about 200 movies, and was married 9 times. What an overachiever. There's Roy and Trigger riding alongside the Republic film truck. Roy Rogers was born Leonard Franklin Sly in Cincinnati, Ohio on November 5, 1911. His family lived for a while in the Cincinnati tenement building, located where Riverfront Stadium once stood. Lynn's dad, Andrew, and an uncle got tired of city life, so they built a houseboat out of surplus lumber. Wow, that's a great stunt. The Slys floated everybody up the Ohio River, hoping to find a better life in Portsmouth. There they bought a piece of land, but before they could build a house on it, the river flooded, which let the Slys reposition their houseboat on dry land and continue to live in it. You might as well surrender. In 1919, Andrew Sly bought a farm in nearby Duck Run. It became obvious after a while that farming wasn't going to pay the bills, so Andy took a job in a shoe factory in Portsmouth. He'd come home on weekends, and on one of those weekends, he brought a horse for young Lynn, who over the years became an excellent horseman. We've already seen a few examples of that. With the Depression coming on, the Sly family packed up their 23 Dodge and headed to California to visit Lynn's sister Mary, and to look for work. Of course, the Depression had gone west too. We couldn't outrun it. So the Sly family wound up picking peaches in those farm camps John Steinbeck wrote about in Grapes of Wrath. Lynn played mandolin, and he'd been yodeling and calling square dances since he was 10. His sister Mary convinced him to appear on the local radio show, Midnight Frolics. It featured amateurs. Lynn sang a couple of songs, and a few days later, he was asked to sing and play guitar with the Rocky Mountaineers. Roy said it was better than picking peaches.
I'm going to have to take you in. Take it easy. We'll go along to jail peaceably.
Along the way, Lynn met a couple of musicians, Bob Nolan and Tim Spencer. In early 1933, they began playing together as the Pioneer Trio. Adding the Farr brothers on fiddle and guitar, they changed their name to the Sons of the Pioneers, after a radio announcer said they looked too young to be pioneers. And, of course, they were no longer a trio. The Sons of the Pioneers became quite popular on radio, both around LA and across the country thanks to syndicated broadcasts. Bob Nolan wrote terrific songs like Tumbling Tumbleweeds and Cool Water, and they landed a contract with Decca Records. They recorded their first records in August of 1934. And then Hollywood came calling. The Sons of the Pioneers' first film was a Hal Roach short called Slightly Static, released in 1935. They then became part of Columbia's unit making Charles Starrett westerns. Leonard Sly was offered the chance to work as a contract player at Republic Pictures, making $75 a week. The only hitch was he'd have to leave the Sons of the Pioneers. Now that's the Maple City Four backing up Roy and Smiley there. But we reckon we'll be late. Say goodbye to my favorite gal tonight. Let's take a look at Republic Pictures. The Republic story starts with Consolidated Film Industries. Consolidated was a film laboratory owned by Herbert J. Yates, a one-time executive with American Tobacco Company who got into the motion picture lab business back in the days of the silence. Consolidated served many of the tiny little studios cranking out movies on Hollywood's Poverty Row. In 1935, in the middle of the Depression, Yates convinced a half dozen of his Poverty Row clients, Chesterfield, Invincible, Liberty, Majestic, Mascot, and Monogram, each of them owing Consolidated some sizable lab bills, to merge under his leadership. I don't think they had much of a choice but to accept his offer. Yates called this new company, built through acquisition, or 6 of them to be exact, Republic Pictures Corporation. Republic would benefit from Monogram's distribution system, Mascot's production facility, which was the old Mack Sennett lot, and a combined talent roster that included Mascot's newly signed cowboy star Gene Autry and a young hopeful named John Wayne who was making cheap westerns for Monogram. Republic's first release was John Wayne and Westward Ho! Their second picture was Tumbling Tumbleweeds, named after the Sons of the Pioneer song, starring Gene Autry and Smiley Burnett. It was directed by Joseph Kane. We'll get to Mr. Kane a bit later. In 1936, Republic released their first serial, Darkest Africa, a 15-chapter jungle adventure starring Clyde Beatty. That's Earl Dwyer as the mayor. Between 1921 and his death in 1940, Dwyer appeared in more than 150 films. Dwyer was in a lot of westerns, usually as an old man or a bad guy. He was in Riders of Destiny with Wayne in 1934, Alias John Law with Bob Steele, and Wagon Trail with Harry Carey in 1935, The Crooked Trail with Johnny Mac Brown in 1936, and on and on and on. It wasn't all westerns, however. Dwyer also turned up in The New Adventures of Tarzan serial, Assassin of Youth, Angels with Dirty Faces, His Girl Friday, and Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe. But back to Republic. Republic Pictures proved successful, and Yates claimed greater and greater authority over the studio. So much so that Tram Carr and W.L. Johnston of Monogram pulled their company out of the Republic Collective in 1937. Monogram would eventually become the studio Allied Artists. Gene Autry quickly became the country's top cowboy star. His contract with Republic awarded Yates a piece of the money Autry was making from endorsements, merchandising, and personal appearances. Now, as you'd expect, Autry didn't like that arrangement too much. He wanted to keep what he was making away from Republic, and he threatened to ride off to another studio if Yates didn't revise his contract. Oh, and Autry wanted a pay raise to go with it. So Republic started looking around for someone to take Autry's place should the need arise. And so, in 1937, Leonard Sly heard that Republic was conducting auditions for a new singing cowboy because of their contract problems with Gene Autry. Republic had cast Sly, sometimes billed as Dick Weston, in a few Autry movies. In The Old Corral from 1936, Roy actually had a fight with Gene. Gene wins, of course. So Sly, or Weston, threw his hat into the ring, hoping to make the leap from contract player to cowboy star. His screen test landed him a 7-year contract at Republic, and another name change, this time to Roy Rogers. The Maple City Four there were founded in 1924 by Fritz Meisner, Pat Pedersen, Art Janes, and Al Rice. In 1926, they began appearing on the radio on Chicago's WLS. They became popular as much for their crazy antics as for their tight harmonies. The Maple City Four only made 3 movies, a couple of Gene Autry pictures, Get Along Little Dogies and The Old Barn Dance, followed by Under Western Stars here. Okay, so Republic had Gene Autry's next picture, Washington Cowboy, in pre-production when Autry announced that he wasn't going to report for work. Washington Cowboy, retitled Under Western Stars, would introduce the studio's newest star, Roy Rogers. Autry's friend and sidekick Smiley Burnett was to be kept in the film, but Burnett refused to do it. After all, his contract was with Gene, not with Republic. Smiley decided to go through with it after Autry encouraged him to, and after he was promised top billing along with Rogers. That's Carol Hughes, Guy Usher, and Stephen Chase. Carol Hughes came from Chicago. At 14, she was acting and dancing in an Oshkosh stock company. Then she was part of the Conway Sisters team. In the late 1920s, she met a young actor named Frank Phelan. They married and became the dancing and singing team of Phelan and Hughes. But by that time, vaudeville was on its way out, and Frank and Carol wound up in Hollywood in 1935. She landed bit parts right away in pictures like George White's Scandals and Ceiling Zero, and was signed as a contract player by Warner Brothers. In 1938, she appeared with Gene Autry in Goldmine in the Sky and Man from Music Mountain, did Under Western Stars the same year, and she played Dale Arden in the 1940s serial Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe. Over the years, the parts got smaller in pictures like The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, Every Girl Should Be Married, Mighty Joe Young, and DOA. But she made a few more westerns. Under Fiesta Stars with Gene Autry in 1941, Home in Oklahoma with Roy Rogers in 1946, and Stagecoach Kid with Tim Holt in 1949. Her husband Frank Phelan stayed a very busy character actor through the 1970s. You'll find him in all sorts of things: Gone with the Wind, The Grapes of Wrath, Sergeant York, The Pride of the Yankees, It's a Wonderful Life, The Sniper, Hangman's Knot, Riot in Cell Block 11, 7th Cavalry, and Gunfight at the OK Corral. But Phelan's best known for playing Herbert T. Gillis, the grocery store owner and long-suffering dad of Dobie Gillis on TV's The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. Now, this was shot around Lone Pine in the Alabama hills. Released in August of 1938, Under Western Stars was a hit, and Roy Rogers was on his way. In his first couple of movies, Smiley Burnett stayed on as his sidekick. Republic ironed things out with Autry, and he kept making pictures there until he enlisted during World War II. Smiley went back to Gene Autry's films, and with Roy's Southward Ho in 1939, George Gabby Hayes rode along with Roy Rogers. And of course, Roy always rode Trigger. That is Dick Elliott as Congressman Scully on the left there. Richard Elliott was born in Boston in 1886. He worked as a stage actor for decades before making his first film. But he made up for lost time, appearing in well over 200 movies from the 30s up until his death in 1961. Elliott's films include The Prisoner of Shark Island, Mr. Moto's Gamble, Frontier Marshal, Another Thin Man, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, Blondie's Lucky Day, The Devil Thumbs a Ride, Gun Crazy, and Rancho Notorious. He was just as active on television, appearing on shows like Dick Tracy, I Love Lucy, I Married Joan, My Little Margie, Adventures of Superman, The Real McCoys, Maverick, and Rawhide. One of Elliott's last roles turned out to be one of his most popular. He played Mayor Pike on The Andy Griffith Show. He passed away during the shooting of the second season. When you look at it today, Under Western Stars stands out from the Roy Rogers movies that came right after it. It takes place in that weird B-Western version of modern day, with cowboys riding horses and carrying six guns, while much of the cast wear contemporary suits and dresses and ride around in cars. In that way, it plays more like the Gene Autry film it was intended to be than what we think of as a 1930s Roy Rogers movie. Roy Rogers went on to make more than 80 movies for Republic. You can roughly divide those films into three groups. Once you get past Under Western Stars, the earliest group is made up of historic westerns, produced from 1938 to 1941, and typically directed by Joe Kane. Most of these are period films, and some have Roy playing real-life characters. Billy the Kid Returns, Days of Jesse James, Young Bill Hickok, Young Buffalo Bill, etc. Of course, even when Roy's Billy the Kid, he's still the good guy. Now, these tend to be straightforward action pictures with a few songs scattered throughout, 2 or 3 at most. Then there's the second group, beginning in 41 or 42. These often take place in the present day, and Roy is just called Roy. These are fairly elaborate musicals with the number of action scenes reduced to make room for more songs and production numbers, complete with pretty girls and orchestras. Roy's outfits often look more chorus than chorale. The story goes that Herbert J. Yates, the president of the Republic, was inspired by seeing Oklahoma on Broadway. Now, after serving in World War II, Republic's master serial director William Whitney returned. He made one last serial, and then he took over the Roy Rogers Pictures. Whitney is responsible for this third group of Roy Rogers movies, which usually take place in the modern day. Whitney went for more action and less music and a decidedly darker, more violent tone. From 1946 to 1951, Whitney directed 27 Roy Rogers movies. Many of them were shot in true color by Jack Marta. Republic Pictures had a unique business model, and they divided their output into 4 categories: Jubilee, Anniversary, Deluxe, and Premiere. Weird names. Jubilee was usually a Western shot in 7 days for about $60,000.
Anything you have to say to me is all right for my friends to hear. Hello, boys.
Anniversary, those were pictures filmed in 14 to 15 days for $175,000 to $200,000.
Funny, boys. Very funny.
The Deluxe group were major productions with budgets of around $500,000. Some of the Deluxe films were from independent production companies and picked up for release by Republic. Now last was Premiere. These were usually from top directors like John Ford and Fritz Lang. These budgets could reach $1 million or more.
Give me a chance to tell him what I think of him, and that'll be plenty. 50% cut on water rates. Don't make me laugh, Mr. Fairbanks.
Okay, so let's get back to Roy Rogers. In the early 40s, Roy began to supplement his Republic paycheck by making personal appearances. He had to, since postage to answer his mountain of fan mail was eating him alive. So Roy toured the country in a station wagon, earning $150 a night. By 1943, he was a top Western star at the box office, a position he held until he made the transition to television in 1951. The king of the cowboys, indeed. In 1944, Rogers made a picture called The Cowboy and the Senorita. In it was an actress and singer named Dale Evans. Dale Evans was born Lucille Wood Smith on October 31st, 1912 in Texas. She was married at 14, a mother at 15, and divorced at 17. She moved to Memphis and worked in an insurance company while singing a little bit on the radio. Eventually, she headed to Louisville, Kentucky, and became popular singing on a local station there. She took the stage name Dale Evans. That's the Winneduma Hotel in Independence, California.
What is your daughter doing with Rogers? How do I know?
It was built in 1927 by Walter Dow of Burbank. He wanted to attract the movie crews that were shooting westerns in the area.
Gentlemen, may I present Mr. Rogers? This is Tom Andrews.
The hotel hosted stars like Roy Rogers, Gary Cooper, and Bing Crosby.
And my father, Mr. Fairbanks.
Walter Dow would also build the Dow Villa Hotel in Lone Pine, again to attract movie people.
Considers you a skinflint, a penny-pinching pirate, and what was that? Oh, yes, a coup. And furthermore...
So after Louisville, Dale Evans moved to Dallas, Texas, and again found local success on the radio. She and her husband, R. Dale Butts, moved to Chicago, where she was approached about appearing in the movies. She signed with Fox Pictures, did a few things, then was cast in The Cowboy and the Senorita. Roy and Dale became an item later, after Dale's divorce and after the death of Roy's first wife.
Common sense, Rogers. I think you're the man I need to look after some of my business interests. That's
Roy proposed during a rodeo appearance at Chicago's Stadium, and they were married over New Year's Eve 1947 at the Flying L Ranch in Davis, Oklahoma, where they'd shot Home in Oklahoma a few months earlier. When Roy and Dale returned to his ranch in Lake Hughes, California, the entire town honored their most famous residents with a square dance party, complete with a 50-pound wedding cake. In the early 50s, a contract dispute over Roy's movies appearing on television put an end to his time at Republic, leading to an eventual lawsuit. Pals of the Golden West, released in 1951, was his last picture for Republic. Son of Paleface, done for Paramount, followed, along with 100 episodes of The Roy Rogers Show. The TV show ran from 51 to 57 on NBC. The first 4 episodes were filmed in July of 51, with Roy reporting to Paramount for Son of Paleface on August 1st. On TV, Roy rode Trigger, Dale rode Buttermilk, and Pat Brady drove the Jeep Nellie Bell. Each episode of the show would end with the song Happy Trails, written by Dale. After the show's original run, it continued to air on Saturday mornings and weekday afternoons for years. But Roy Rogers was more than just an actor or a singer. Roy Rogers was a brand. Roy Rogers Enterprises licensed his name and likeness for a multitude of products: toys, cap guns, books, charm bracelets, comics, breakfast cereals, clothing, even an eventual chain of roast beef sandwich restaurants. All this made Roy a very rich man. In 1967, the Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Museum opened in Apple Valley, California. It was moved to Victorville in 1976. Roy spent a great deal of time at the museum, visiting with fans and signing autographs. Roy and Dale held on to pretty much everything, making for plenty of stuff to exhibit. On display in the museum were guns, saddles, and costumes, the 1923 Dodge that brought the Sly family to California, even Trigger himself. Roy Rogers, the king of the cowboys, passed away in 1998. Dale Evans, the Queen of the West, followed him in 2001. Backing up a bit, things started to go awry at Republic Pictures in the 50s. One reason would have to be Yates' determination to make a movie star out of his girlfriend, Vera Ruba Ralston. Vera Ruba was a Czechoslovakian figure skater. She represented Czechoslovakia at the 1936 European Figure Skating Championships and the Winter Olympic Games. After the 1937 European Figure Skating Championships, Vera toured the United States in ice reviews and was offered a screen test by RKO. She turned it down. On March 15, 1939, Ruba and her mother narrowly escaped the Nazi takeover of Prague. They boarded the last plane to Paris, and from there it was on to New York and the ice vanities of 1939. She appeared in a couple of ice skating movies at Republic, Ice Capades in 1941 and Ice Capades Review the following year. At one point, Vera was going to be kicked out of the United States and sent back to Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia when her visa expired. Her dilemma was reported in the newspapers, and she quickly received 2,800 marriage proposals to help her stay in America. But she had another admirer. Republic's Herbert J. Yates was infatuated with the young skater and was determined to make her a movie star. He signed her to a long-term Republic contract in 1943. Ralston was added to her name, and Heruba was eventually dropped. In 1952, though 40 years her senior, Yates left his wife and 4 kids to marry Vera Ralston. Vera Ralston appeared alongside some of Republic's biggest stars in pictures like The Plainsman and the Lady with William Elliott, Erich von Stroheim and Richard Arland in both The Lady and the Monster and Storm over Lisbon, with John Wayne in Dakota and the Fighting Kentuckian, with Fred McMurray in Fair Wind to Java, with Rod Cameron in Spoilers of the Forest, and in Lumberjack with Sterling Hayden.
Yes, please have him call me back.
Vera Ralston never became a star. She did become the butt of plenty of jokes, and it's kind of the Yoko Ono of Republic Pictures, I guess you could say. Though she did pretty good in some pretty cool movies. Another thing that helped take down Republic was competition from television. Folks could now see the kind of stuff on their home screen for free that they'd been shelling out good money for in their local theater. TV brought about a change in the movie-going habits of a huge portion of Republic's audience. Kids no longer had to go to their local theater on Saturday mornings. Republic Pictures was one of the first studios to sell their film library to television. This really hurt their reputation in the industry. It cheesed off the exchanges that distributed their films, and it even got them sued by Roy Rogers in 1951. Roy argued that his old movies on TV with commercials in them implied endorsement of whatever was being advertised, which damaged his name. Roy won, but when Gene Autry tried a similar suit a year later, he lost. In 1958, both the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild of America threatened to strike Republic over residual payments for pictures made after 1948 that were playing on TV. Yates simply wasn't paying them. The writers did strike, and Republic was forced to give in. Now, if all this wasn't enough to have Yates and Republic on the ropes, there's the simple fact that the studio didn't adapt. B-movie makers had always succeeded when they anticipated or cashed in on a fad or exploited current events. Sam Katzman was a real master at this. American International was too. Republic kept cranking out the same old stuff, as wonderful as it was, long after the market had moved on. It kind of makes sense that Republic would release what is considered the very last singing cowboy movie, Phantom Stallion, starring Rex Allen, 1954. So where were Republic's monster movies, or their juvenile delinquent pictures, the kind of stuff Katzman and AIP were cleaning up with in the mid to late 50s? By the time Republic hopped on board with pictures like The Unearthly, Satan's Satellites, 18 and Anxious, and Juvenile Jungle, the writing was on the wall. Where Republic had released 50 to 60 pictures a year in its prime years, they only released 26 in 1957, 17 in 1958, and just 5 in 1959. And quite a few of the later ones were actually produced by someone else. On July 1st, 1959, Herbert J. Yates turned over control to Republic to Victor M. Carter, a banker and turnaround specialist. He pulled the plug on making movies, both for theaters and TV. The Consolidated Lab, it kept going. The studio's back catalog was kept available for TV or theatrical bookings. And the studio space was rented out for movie and TV production, a new business model that worked out very well. In 1963, the studios were leased to CBS, who exercised their option to buy in 1967. CBS is still there, and the old Republic lot is now known as Studio Center. Republic's tight budgets and condensed schedules encouraged or demanded creativity and ingenuity to make quality pictures on time and on budget. Republic's people rose to the challenge time and time again.
Glad to know you, Mr. Rogers. How do you do, Congressman? I'd like to...
Republic was only in its third year when this film was made, but their team of stunt people, actors and actresses, directors and editors was largely in place. Joe Kane was Republic's top director. Coming from mascot with the merger, he was at Republic from the studio's forming to the bitter end. Kane came to Republic Pictures as an editor after working as a cellist, serving in World War I, and starting at the very bottom of the movie business. His first film as director was Gene Autry's first film too, Tumbling Tumbleweeds, released in 1935. In 1938, Kane moved over to the studio's newest cowboy star, Roy Rogers, for Under Western Stars. As Kane told it, while we were on location on that picture, they sent word up that he was going to be called Roy Rogers. Kane once described how these Republic Westerns were made. "I became both producer and director of all the Rogers pictures I made," he said. "I did 8 a year. I would hire the writers, prepare the scripts. Then I'd bring in the assistant manager and the unit manager and get the thing ready. Then we'd go out and shoot it. We'd bring it back in, and then the cutting department would take over. I'd look at it after the first cut and make any suggestions I had. In the meantime, I'd be getting started on another one." From there, it was on to Republic's bigger pictures, starting with Flame of the Barbary Coast starring John Wayne. It cost around $600,000, a lot of money for Republic in those days. As Kane became involved in the bigger pictures, he was taken off the Roy Rogers movies. Joe Kane continued to produce and direct Republic's larger scale films, from a string of excellent middle-budget westerns starring William Elliott or Rod Cameron, to 1954's Jubilee Trail, an epic by Republic standards that starred Vera Ralston and Forrest Tucker. With The Maverick Queen in 1956, Kane directed the first film in Republic's widescreen process Naturama. It featured Barbara Stanwyck and Barry Sullivan. As Republic wasted away in the late 50s, Kane soldiered on. His last Republic picture was The Man Who Died Twice. He directed around 115 feature films, over 100 of them for Republic. Joe Kane, like so many other B-movie makers from this period, found a new career in television. He directed episodes of shows like Cheyenne, Bonanza, Rawhide, and Laramie. Joe Kane passed away in 1975. Like so many Republic pictures, Under Western Stars was shot by Jack Marta. Marta's career began in the silence, and by the time he retired in the late 70s, he worked on well over 100 films, most of them at Republic. Flying Tigers with John Wayne, Hellfire with William Elliott and Marie Windsor, Montana Belle with Jane Russell. That's just a tiny sampling of Marta's work at the studio. He became quite adept at working around the shortcomings of Republic's color process True Color, which was used for a number of Roy Rogers' later films. In the late 50s, with Republic on the decline, Marta shot some pictures for American International, like The Bonnie Parker Story, directed by William Whitney, and War of the Colossal Beast, before moving on to TV shows like Route 66, Batman, and The Green Hornet. His later films would include Cat Ballou, Walking Tall, and Steven Spielberg's TV movie Duel, which earned Marta an Emmy nomination. His last work was on a few episodes of Hawaii Five-O's final season.
All of this tragedy and ruin, ladies and gentlemen, because of lack of water. In times like these, folks just naturally turn to prayer. Dust, dust, dust in the skies, dust on the trail, dust in my eyes, dust, dust, can't see the sun, can't find my way, the dust has won, the cattle and the sheep bedded down.
This song, Dust, serves as the movie's centerpiece in a way.
The vultures in the sky know the time is now.
It was written by Johnny Marvin and Gene Autry. Autry had already recorded it. Autry sued Republic for $25,000 right before the picture's release, saying he had not authorized its use.
Where is your rain and sunshine? Dust.
Autry and Republic settled out of court on this, and Gene was listed as the writer when he recorded it, but from then on, Johnny Marvin is the only writer credited. It also isn't listed with the other songs in the main titles. Dust ended up being nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Song.
Where are the ranchers, the cow-punching crowd? What has become of the rain? Out of the blue came a threatening cloud, causing this awful change.
The associate producer of this picture was Saul C. Siegel. Saul Siegel started out in the movies at Herbert J. Yates Consolidated Film Labs in New York in the early 30s. His brother, Mo Siegel, helped out with the multiple mergers that created Republic Pictures. Mo stayed on at Republic as an executive producer, and Saul joined him there. It was Saul Siegel who signed the Sons of the Pioneers, including a certain Leonard Sly, to Republic Pictures. Siegel was also behind transforming Sly into a cowboy star named Roy Rogers. In 1940, just a couple years after this film opened, Siegel left Republic for Paramount, and in 1946 he moved on to 20th Century Fox. At Fox, his pictures A Letter to Three Wives and Three Coins in the Fountain were nominated for the Oscar for Best Picture. Some of his other films at Fox were I Was a Male War Bride, Panic in the Streets, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and Broken Lance. Siegel joined MGM in 1956, where he produced pictures like High Society, Lay Girls, and Some Came Running. In April of 1958, Siegel was made vice president in charge of production. This was at a time when MGM was making great movies like Ben-Hur and North by Northwest. The giant Cinerama epic How the West Was Won would come along in 1962. Now that one was a huge success. Big pictures like Cimarron and Mutiny on the Bounty, however, were not successful, and Siegel was out at MGM. So, he went into independent film production, running his own production company from 64 to 67. You know, going from a Republic B Western like this to How the West Was Won, that's quite a leap. Lester A. Burnett, or Smiley, was born in Illinois in 1911 and grew up in Missouri. He was always musical and could play all sorts of instruments by ear. He never learned to read or write music. By his teens, he was working in vaudeville and on the radio. In December of 1933, Gene Autry hired Burnett to play accordion on National Barn Dance. Autry was the program's biggest star. In 1934, producer Nat Levine of Mascot Pictures hired Autry to appear in the Ken Maynard Western in Old Santa Fe. Smiley drove out west from Chicago with Gene and Ina Autry. In Old Santa Fe ended up featuring 2 songs that Smiley wrote. In 1935, Smiley had a part in Autry's first film as a star, the 12-chapter serial The Phantom Empire. When Mascot became part of Republic, Smiley played Frog Millhouse in Autry's westerns. They ultimately made more than 60 films together. When Autry left to serve in World War II, Smiley wrote along with Sunset Carlson, Bob Livingston, and of course Roy Rogers. Smiley left Republic in 1944 and became a part of Columbia's Durango Kid Pictures starring Charles Starrett. Starrett and Burnett did 56 of them from 1945 to 1952. After the war, Autry left Republic for Columbia, so when Starrett retired, the studio reassigned Burnett to its Gene Autry series. In 1953, Autry left motion pictures for television. Smiley started appearing on TV and radio shows like Louisiana Hayride, the Grand Ole Opry, and Ranch Party. In the mid-60s, Smiley played railroad engineer Charlie Pratt on both Petticoat Junction and Green Acres. After completing the 4th season of Petticoat Junction, Smiley became ill and passed away in February of 1967. Smiley Burnett wrote more than 400 songs, and many of them ended up in his movies. Under Western Stars was written by Elizabeth Burbridge, Stuart McGowan, and Darrell Buck McGowan from a story by the McGowans. Stuart McGowan became a script boy, and he eventually worked as part of the writing team with his older brother, Darrell. Their sister was a Max Sennett bathing beauty. Stuart and Darrell almost always worked as a team, getting their start at Republic, writing pictures like Red River Valley starring Gene Autry and King of the Pecos with John Wayne, both released in 1936. Stuart and Darrell became producers in 1946 with stuff like Valley of the Zombies, and beginning in 1950, they directed 3 films together, with the first being The Showdown, starring Bill Elliott, with Walter Brennan, Marie Windsor, and Harry Morgan. They wrote another Western starring William Elliott and Marie Windsor, The Terrific Hellfire from 1949. Then, moving over to TV, the McGowans produced and occasionally wrote the early seasons of Death Valley Days. Now on to Betty Burbridge. Elizabeth Burbridge was born in San Diego in 1895. She started out as an actress, appearing in silent features and shorts for studios like Biograph, Ince, and SNA. This was on the East Coast. Now, there are conflicting stories about how and when Betty Burbridge started writing scripts. She evidently wrote a few silent shorts around 1917, and in the early 20s she started writing a syndicated newspaper column on interior decoration and etiquette. One story goes that around 1924, she was asked to come out to Hollywood by a family friend, film producer Lester F. Scott Jr., whose action pictures made a lot of westerns. So she bought a ticket west and got on the train with a stack of Western pulp magazines to do some research along the way. It's a good story, even if it isn't true. She wrote silent westerns starring Buddy Roosevelt, Buffalo Bill Jr., and Wally Wales. Then, when sound came in, she wrote westerns for Rex Leese, Bob Custer, Jack Perrin, and Tom Tyler. And then, in 1935, Miss Burbage went to Republic and became the lead writer on the Gene Autry movies. She said her story ideas came from the polk westerns that she read, things she heard from the movie cowboys on the set, and the plots of stage plays she'd seen back in New York. Later, she'd work from an idea a producer came up with. From 1917 to 1949, Beverly Burbage wrote over 120 films, features, and shorts. Many of the silents are lost. In the 50s, she started writing for television. The Cisco Kid, The Gene Autry Show, The Range Rider, and more. There's a great magazine ad for Smith Corona typewriters from the early 1940s. It features Miss Burbage typing away with Gene Autry looking over her shoulder. It's very cool.
Well, we might find enough for the ladies, but the men will have to wait till we reach Larkin's place tomorrow. Get the canteen, Frog. You folks...
This is Lone Pine again, up in the Alabama hills. In the cap there, as Congressman Marlowe, is Tom Chatterton. Chatterton was from Geneva, New York. He worked with several stock theater companies and in vaudeville before making silent movies in New York for Thomas Ince.
That's all there is.
Chatterton had some leads in silent films, but he really found his place in B-westerns and serials. He's in westerns like The Boss Rider of Gun Creek, Rovin' Tumbleweeds, Covered Wagon Days, West of Dodge City, and The Fabulous Texan. He appears in the serials Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe, The Phantom, Captain America, Drums of Fu Manchu, and Zorro's Black Whip. But it wasn't all B stuff. He was also in Dodge City, Abe Lincoln in Illinois, and It's a Wonderful Life. His last film, by the way, was The Wyoming Bandit with Alan Rocky Lane in 1949. Lone Pine, California, sits in the Owens Valley to the east of the Alabama hills. Hollywood discovered the area back in the fall of 1919 when the silent Fatty Arbuckle movie The Roundup was filmed in the Alabama hills. Hollywood's been coming back ever since. Silent cowboy stars such as Tom Mix, Buck Jones, Hoot Gibson, Ken Maynard, and Jack Hoxie made plenty of films in the area. Every once in a while, there'd be more than one film shooting at any given time. The good people of Lone Pine knew a good thing when they saw it, and they began to work on the films being made there, usually as extras, stuntmen, or wranglers. Rancher Al Gallagher provided the crews with horses and cattle when they needed them. Other ranchers got in on it too. But Russell Spanhauer took it a step further. He built an entire business around supporting the folks from Hollywood. He provided horses and cattle from his Anchor Ranch, and he offered wagons and other props, and he would round up local cowboys or other residents when they were needed. Later, Spanhauer added sets to his ranch, from a Spanish mission to a western town. As sound came in, the number of westerns being made in the area increased. Along with the old guys like Tom Mix and Ken Maynard, the big studios and small independent outfits brought their casts and crews north to Lone Pine. There was Tom Keene working for RKO, Randolph Scott doing Zane Grey movies for Paramount, Fox was doing George O'Brien pictures. John Wayne, Bob Steele, Tom Tyler, Johnny Mac Brown, they were all riding around Lone Pine. In 1935, producer Harry Pop Sherman decided to shoot his Hopalong Cassidy films around Lone Pine. William Boyd made 66 Hopalong Cassidy pictures, with 30 of them shot around Lone Pine. Of course, singing cowboys like Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, and Tex Ritter would follow Hoppy to Lone Pine too. Watch enough B-westerns from the mid to late 30s through the early 40s, and you'll probably start to recognize some of the rocks. The film editor on Underwestern Stars was Lester Orlebeck. He cut several of the earlier Gene Autry pictures, such as Public Cowboy No. 1, and Joe Kane started showing him the ropes as a director. Orlebeck edited westerns like Call of the Mesquiteers, Billy the Kid Returns, The Night Riders, The Arizona Kid, South of the Border, and Nevada City before serving in World War II. He worked on training films for the Air Force. After the war, he returned to Republic and cut a number of Roy Rogers films. TV kept Orlebeck quite busy in the 1950s. He cut episodes of Wanted Dead or Alive, Zane Grey Theater, The Rifleman, Burke's Law, Honey West, Gilligan's Island, and The Wild Wild West. His last work before passing away in 1970 was a couple dozen episodes of Daniel Boone. Trigger was billed as the smartest horse in the movies. By the time Roy selected the Palomino for Underwestern Stars, Trigger had already appeared in the 1938 The Adventures of Robin Hood. Olivia de Havilland, as Maid Marian, wrote him. He was called Golden Cloud at that time. Legend has it that Smiley Burnett suggested the name Trigger after someone commented that the Palomino was quick on the trigger. Others say Joe Kane came up with the name. In 1943, Roy bought Trigger from Hudgens Stable for $2,500. Rogers was only making $75 a week, so he paid him off on time. Roy later said it was the best $2,500 he ever spent. Roy rode a number of horses in his movies, on TV, and in personal appearances. The original Trigger, the one we see here, became known to the cast and crew as the Old Man. There was Little Trigger, who did all those great tricks and gags in The Son of Paleface. And then there was Trigger Jr., who did most of the personal appearances. The only film Trigger Jr. ever appeared in was 1950's Trigger Jr., naturally. With all that happened to get Underwestern Stars to the screen, from Gene Autry's tiff with Yates to turning Leonard Sly into Roy Rogers, it all played out in a fairly short period of time. By the way, Leonard Sly legally changed his name to Roy Rogers in 1942. In September of 1937, while Gene Autry was making Springtime in the Rockies, Republic announced that they would be putting $175,000, a great big boost to their typical budget, into Autry's next film, Washington Cowboy. They were hoping to get Ann Dvorak to co-star. Smiley Burnett was to appear, and Joe Kane was to direct. Republic was hoping that by making the Autry films bigger, he'd be less likely to head to another studio. Well, Gene's battle with Republic kept going, and in February of 1938, the LA Times reported that Republic had been grooming a new cowboy star, Roy Rogers, and that he would appear in Washington Cowboy. The studio's bio traded Roy's Ohio birthplace for Cody, Wyoming. Around that same time, it was reported that Smiley Burnett's lawyer was trying to get Smiley out of his contract, saying he didn't feel the studio had any right to use him to establish Autry's replacement. Besides, Smiley was under a personal contract with Gene, not with Republic. Eventually, Gene told Smiley to go ahead and do the movie. While all this was happening, Moe Siegel, president of Republic, and the brother of producer Saul Siegel, was telling anyone who would listen that Rogers was not a replacement for Autry. Toward the end of February 1938, the news was that Autry had sold his song Dust, written with Johnny Marvin, to Republic for Washington Cowboy, even though he wasn't going to be in it. At the beginning of March, articles profiling Roy Rogers started turning up in the papers. Some of the stuff was true, some was not. As the picture was getting close to release, the title was changed to Under Western Stars. Under Western Stars opened in Dallas with Roy, Smiley, and the Sons of the Pioneers in attendance. Gossip columnist Luella Parsons wrote of the Dallas premiere, "The audience rose to a man and cheered. The film company, heartened by this display of favorable temperament and even a little stunned at the unexpected reception, decided to call in their homespun Opry and roadshow it." In other words, Republic, encouraged by the screening in Dallas, rethought how Under Western Stars would be distributed, putting it in bigger theaters in bigger cities, along with the usual smaller theaters across the country. It played at the Criterion Theater in New York, for instance. Parsons went on to compare Roy Rogers to a young Gary Cooper and encouraged Hollywood to pay attention to the success of this simple, unpretentious movie. Roy would later say Luella Parsons' enthusiasm for the film, and for him, made a huge difference. I love watching Roy and Trigger tear it up like that. Roy Rogers would tour the country in support of Under Western Stars for the next few months.
Come on, get back here and get down. I'll never get to the dam now. Unhook them horses.
They say other studios did actually study the film, trying to figure out how to make a good, successful film for so little money.
Blast the ditch and the water can't get to the dam. Get that wagon to roll.
With its story of an honest young man becoming a politician and taking on what we probably call the deep state today, Under Western Stars hints at Frank Cabra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, starring James Stewart, which came out the next year and ended up winning a slew of Oscars. It's interesting to note that the film's story of water rights, no doubt based on the California water wars of the early 20th century, would also be the basis of Roman Polanski's Chinatown in 1974.
You can show me how. If you want a happy life, just say yes and be the wife of Roger, the congressman.
In 2009, the Library of Congress selected Under Western Stars for the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Roy Rogers would no doubt be quite proud of that. Well, that was Under Western Stars. I'm Toby Roan. Thanks for riding along. And, to quote the king of the cowboys himself, may the good Lord take a liking to you.